Imagine sitting down to watch, like, an ancient historical biography. You're probably expecting this really slow, sweeping introduction, right?
Oh, yeah. Usually with a narrator carefully detailing this massive, long family tree.
Exactly, just to establish the main character's pedigree,
Mm.
and then maybe a leisurely description of their childhood. But instead, the screen flashes, the audio spikes, and you are thrown instantly into a modern, shaky cam action film.
Right into the chaos. No backstory, no setup at all.
Just a relentless, breathless sprint from one intense scene to the next. Welcome to the deep dive, and before we get into the thick of it, I want to start right off by wishing a sincere divine blessing on your day and your entire week ahead. It is wonderful to have you with us.
It is so great to be diving into this. And, that contrast you just described, that's the perfect way to frame our focus today.
Yeah, so today we are pulling from the introductory materials of two incredibly comprehensive resources. We've got the Holman Study Bible and the NAA Study Bible.
Two really solid heavyweight sources.
Right. And our mission is to explore the Gospel of Mark. We want to uncover the unvarnished, just shockingly fast-paced portrait of Jesus that this specific text presents.
Because reading Mark, according to the scholars in these study Bibles, is just, well, it's a completely different experience from reading the other gospel.
It really is, and it's foundational, right?
Absolutely. It fundamentally shapes everything that comes after it. Historically, Mark is widely considered to be the very first gospel written.
That was the blueprint.
Exactly. It served as the primary blueprint for both Matthew and Luke. When you read those other two accounts, you're essentially reading expansions and adaptations of the framework that Mark originally laid down.
So let's look at how that original framework is actually edited. Because the sources describe Mark's literary style as a documentary in drama form.
Which is a great way to put it.
Yeah, it feels less like a smooth historical timeline and more like a rapid-fire sequence of singular video clips. Like, he skips Jesus' physical description completely.
Completely ignores it.
He skips the family origins, the early life, all of it.
And we really have to consider the psychology behind those omissions. Because a Jewish reader in the first century, they would demand a genealogy.
Right, they need the proof.
Exactly. They need to see that ancestral line tracing back to King David to prove a legal historical claim to the title of Messiah. But Mark ignores that entirely. He chooses instead to focus almost exclusively on actions and works.
You just see a protagonist constantly in motion.
Constantly. Healing, casting out demons, performing miracles, and moving relentlessly from one location to another.
And the pacing is tied together by this one recurring mechanism in the text.
Yeah.
Over and over again, everything happens immediately.
Yes, that word is everywhere in Mark.
Right. The Holman introduction points out that as soon as one episode terminates, another one instantly begins. And the Greek verbs used in the original text are specifically chosen to portray ongoing action.
It really creates this feeling that the narrator is just out of breath trying to keep up with what's happening.
Okay, let's unpack this a bit. Because reading Mark sounds less like reading a historical textbook and more like watching a modern action movie, like Jason Bourne.
Oh, that's a brilliant analogy.
Right, where you're just dropped right into the action. But wait, why? Why write it like that?
Well, the writer actually prefers using the present tense to describe past events. It's a grammatical choice that drops you, the reader, directly into the room.
Like, he doesn't say Jesus went to the lake.
Right. It's more like he goes to the lake, the crowds press in, he heals a man, immediately he leaves. It's so visceral.
Yeah.
But the brilliance of this relentless speed is how it sets up a massive structural shift later in the text.
Right, the deceleration in chapter 11.
Exactly. For 10 chapters, the audience is just flying through months and years of ministry at breakneck speed. This creates what the sources call a mosaic or a collage of Christ, which is designed to keep the audience hyper-engaged.
They're leaning forward in their seats.
Right. But then Jesus enters Jerusalem, and suddenly the timeline shifts. It goes from covering years to tracking specific days and finally tracking exact hours.
Oh, wow. So you speed everything up to get the audience's adrenaline going.
And then hit the brakes.
And right at the climax, you drop into slow motion so they feel the weight of every single second.
Exactly. It makes the events of that final week feel incredibly heavy.
Which brings up a logistical question for me. If the editing is this deliberate and the style is this urgent, who is actually holding the camera? I mean, the Gospel of Mark is technically anonymous, right?
It is, yeah. The text itself does not name its author.
Okay.
However, we do have substantial evidence for early church historians. Eusebius, writing around 326 AD, preserved the words of Papias.
And Papias was a bishop from around 120 AD, right?
Yes, and Papias firmly identified the author as a man named John Mark.
Okay, and John Mark has quite the backstory, because the early Jerusalem church actually met in his mother Mary's house.
It did.
The NAA source even mentions that this house was possibly the site of the Last Supper itself. So he grew up completely immersed in this environment.
Definitely a front row seat.
And he was also the cousin of Barnabas, who was a really prominent early Christian leader. But, and here's where it gets really interesting but also a bit confusing, I need to push back on this a bit.
Okay, what are you saying?
Well, I am looking at his resume in these study notes, and it is glaringly problematic.
Ah, yes. His early career was definitely complicated.
Complicated is a generous word. I mean, he accompanies Paul and Barnabas on their very first missionary journey, and when things get tough in a region called Perga, Mark abandons them.
He does. He just packs up and leaves.
He quits and goes home.
Yeah.
And it causes such a massive rift that Paul and Barnabas later separate over it. So if Mark is a deserter who quit his first major assignment, and he wasn't even one of the original 12 disciples, why on earth did the early church trust his account enough to make it the foundational blueprint?
That is the core mystery of his credibility. And the answer lies in who Mark ended up working for later in his life.
Okay.
He eventually recovers from that failure and ends up in Rome, serving directly alongside the Apostle Peter.
Oh, wow. Peter.
Yes. Peter even affectionately refers to Mark as my son in his own letters. So according to Papias, Mark became Peter's interpreter and writer, recording with total accuracy the eyewitness preaching of Peter himself.
Wait, really? So we aren't really reading Mark's observations.
Not entirely, no.
We're reading Peter's memories, adapted by Mark for a specific audience in Rome.
Exactly. And the internal evidence supporting this is just fascinating, especially because of what the text chooses to highlight and, more importantly, what it chooses to hide.
Right.
If someone is trying to legitimize a new religious movement, they usually elevate their leaders, right? They make them look amazing. But Mark's narrative brutally highlights Peter's weaknesses, his deep misunderstandings, and his ultimate betrayal.
It totally leaves out the highlight reel, because there are highly praiseworthy moments about Peter recorded in Matthew and Luke, like walking on water or being called the rock of the church, that are completely missing from Mark.
And the omission of those triumphant moments isn't an accident.
No.
It serves as internal proof of an unfiltered, unvarnished eyewitness source. Peter isn't trying to make himself look like a hero. He's dictating a humble, honest account of his own failures.
And we have to look at who they were adapting the story for. The study Bibles emphasize that Mark is writing to Roman Gentiles.
Yes.
And he leaves massive cultural clues in the text to prove this.
He really does. For instance, he frequently translates Aramaic words into Greek because his Roman audience wouldn't know Aramaic.
Right.
He also stops the narrative to explain basic Jewish washing customs. And he uses Latin terms instead of their Greek equivalents, like using the Latin word for a centurion, for example.
He also rarely quotes the Old Testament compared to the other gospel writers, which, if you think about it, makes perfect sense when you consider the psychology of a Roman citizen. Entirely. Quoting ancient Jewish prophets to a Roman in the middle of the empire would be like citing a foreign nation's constitution to win a local argument. They wouldn't care. Romans respected present action, military might, and power.
And that Roman worldview presents Mark with a monumental theological hurdle, because in Jesus' day, the concept of the Messiah was heavily loaded.
Heavily loaded.
The prevailing expectation, even among Jewish people, was that the Messiah would be a conquering military hero who would crush the Romans and establish a political kingdom.
So Mark is trying to sell a Roman audience who worships dominance and conquest on a hero who gets arrested, beaten, and crucified by Roman soldiers.
Yes.
That is a massive public relations nightmare. How does he even handle it?
By completely redefining the concept of what a savior actually looks like, Mark introduces the argument that the true Messiah must endure rejection, suffering, death, and only then resurrection.
Wow.
And to do this, he offers an incredibly robust portrait of Jesus' humanity.
The raw emotion. Because Mark emphasizes the human reactions of Jesus more than any other gospel. He shows him angry at the stubbornness of religious leaders. He shows him deeply distressed, grieving, and even amazed by people's lack of faith. It's a very visceral, grounded portrait.
And this grounded portrait forces you, the reader, to constantly evaluate what you're looking at. The Holman introduction points out that the central question of the entire book is found in Mark chapter 4.
Oh, with the storm, right.
Yes. Jesus calms a massive fatal storm on the Sea of Galilee, and the disciples, who are just soaking wet and terrified, look at each other and ask, who is this?
Who is this? That question literally drives the entire narrative forward.
It really does.
And Mark uses this brilliant running literary irony to answer it. Because if you track who actually recognizes Jesus throughout the text, it's wild. God announces who Jesus is at the very beginning at his baptism.
Right?
The demonic forces immediately recognize him whenever he casts them out. They know exactly who they are dealing with.
Right.
But the humans are entirely clueless.
Just totally in the dark. The religious experts completely miss it. His own family thinks he has lost his mind.
Wow.
And his closest friends, the disciples, they're constantly confused. I mean, Peter finally manages to confess it halfway through the book, but then immediately demonstrates he has no idea what the title actually means.
Right, and he gets severely rebuked for it.
Exactly.
Which makes the climax of the book so rhetorically powerful.
Yeah.
Because the ultimate unrestricted human confession of who Jesus is doesn't come from a priest.
Nope.
It doesn't come from one of the 12 disciples. It comes from a Roman centurion. An executioner standing at the foot of the cross watches Jesus die in the most humiliating way possible and says, truly, this man was the Son of God.
And consider what that means for Mark's target audience in Rome. It is a staggering subversion of their values.
It really flips everything upside down.
Mark is literally tearing down the Roman idol of dominating violent power. He is arguing that true divine authority isn't found in a conquering army or political supremacy. It is found in the ultimate vulnerability and self-sacrifice of the cross.
So what does this all mean for the audience? The Jewish religious leaders miss it. His own closest friends are confused. But a Roman executioner, the exact demographic Mark is writing to, is the one who finally pierces through the confusion and gets the answer right.
Yes.
But that realization comes with a heavy cost, doesn't it? If the ultimate hero is defined by suffering and service rather than earthly conquest, then following him can't just be about victory laps.
Not at all. The sources outline that the fundamental theme of Mark isn't just presenting a biography. It is an urgent defense of the call to discipleship. And for Mark, discipleship is not merely adhering to a strict moral code or learning a new philosophy.
Right, it isn't just behavior modification.
Exactly. It is fundamentally about a relationship.
Oh.
It involves trusting Jesus, confessing him, observing his conduct closely, and then actively imitating his humble service and self-denial.
But the study Bibles note a very sharp edge to this imitation. To be a disciple in Mark's view means being prepared to face the exact same type of rejection that Jesus faced.
Yeah, and the text frequently uses the title Son of Man when discussing this. It's a phrase Jesus uses to denote his own humanity and his impending suffering.
Okay.
So Mark's argument is that if the Son of Man must suffer and be rejected by the authorities, well, his followers must be prepared to endure the exact same treatment.
So the urgency we talked about earlier, the breathless pacing, the shaky cam action style, the immediately this and immediately that, it isn't just a stylistic choice to keep people entertained.
No, not at all. The pacing reflects the stakes of the message. The purpose of the book is a direct, urgent plea for the reader to repent, respond with faith, and follow, fully knowing the severe cost of that decision.
It sounds like Mark isn't just giving us a history lesson.
Yeah.
He's basically handing the Roman believers, and by extension, you, the listener, an ancient survival guide.
That's a great way to put it.
If you are a Roman believer in the first century reading this, perhaps facing the beginnings of real violent persecution under the empire, he's saying, buckle up, this isn't going to be easy. It sets the expectation. Look at what happened to the leader. Prepare yourselves for the reality of the path.
Yes, and that tension leads us to one of the most fascinating mysteries in the entire manuscript.
Yeah. As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final provocative detail to mull over regarding how this fast-paced action movie actually ends.
Because the structural outlines in both the Holman and NAA sources note this really fascinating anomaly at the very end of the text. Mark contains what scholars call a brief appendix.
Right, chapter 16, verses 9 through 20.
Yes. This
This appendix details some of Jesus' appearances after the resurrection and the commissioning of the disciples. But the fact that it is classified as an appendix suggests something wild about the original manuscript.
It heavily implies that the original text of Mark might have ended abruptly at verse 8.
And if you read verse 8, it is jarring. It describes the women going to the tomb, finding it empty, hearing a message that Jesus has risen, and then they just flee in terror and amazement. The verse literally ends by saying, they said nothing to anyone because they were afraid. End of gospel.
Just a sudden, jarring cut to black.
Right. Why would a text that has been sprinting forward with relentless momentum end on a cliffhanger of silence and fear? Think about everything the sources have shown us today. This isn't just a biography. It's a challenge.
Exactly.
Perhaps ending it there is a deliberate genius choice by Mark. By leaving the narrative hanging unresolved, the text forces you, the reader, to answer the central question. The author hands the camera over to you, forcing you to write the true ending with your own life and your own decision on whether or not to follow.
It transforms the document from a record of the past into an active confrontation in the present.
It really does. We hope this exploration has given you a new perspective on how raw and intentionally crafted this ancient text really is. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey through the sources.
It's been a real pleasure unpacking this with you.
God blesses all of you listening. Until next time.